Imagine standing in the closest thing we have to hell on Earth. You are surrounded by liquid steel burning at 1600 degrees Celsius. The heat is so intense it feels like it is physically pressing against your skin, and the air is thick with blinding sparks. But the most overwhelming part of a steel mill is the noise. It is a constant deafening roar of monstrous furnaces, crushing gears, and colossal cranes moving overhead. In the middle of this absolute sensory chaos, where every second is a battle for survival, there is an unwritten rule. It is a rule so deeply ingrained in the culture of the factory floor that breaking it could cost you your job on the spot, or even earn you a brutal physical retaliation from the veterans in the locker room. You are strictly forbidden from whistling. If you are enjoying our channel, subscribe and turn on the little bell so you don't miss any content. It helps us a lot, and it's free. Now, you might be wondering why a simple, harmless human sound is treated like the ultimate sin in a place filled with massive machinery and obvious physical dangers. People whistle when they are in a good mood, when they are working, or just to pass the time during a long shift. But in a steel mill, a casual whistle from an unsuspecting rookie is not a sign of a cheerful attitude. It is the literal trigger for industrial carnage. To understand why this strict prohibition exists, you have to look at the brutal reality of how communication works when the environment itself is trying to crush your senses. Think about the standard safety gear. Every single worker on that floor is wearing heavy-duty ear protection to prevent permanent hearing loss. Human voices are completely useless here. You could scream at the top of your lungs right next to a coworker, and they would not hear a single syllable over the roaring furnaces. So, you might ask, why not use modern technology? Why not just use two-way radios like they do in construction or mining? Well, here is what nobody tells you about large-scale smelting plants. The magnetic interference generated by the massive electrical currents in the electric arc furnaces is so extreme that standard radio frequencies often become completely unreliable. They turn into pure static exactly when you need them the most. Because of this technological dead zone, the workers who navigate this nightmare have to rely on older, more primitive, and highly effective forms of communication. Visual hand signals are crucial, but they have a fatal flaw. You cannot always see the person giving the signal through the thick, toxic smoke, the blinding glare of molten metal, and the endless maze of steel beams. This brings us to the most dangerous dynamic on the factory floor, the relationship between the men on the ground and the operator of the overhead crane. Look up in any major steel facility, and you will see these massive cranes gliding along the ceiling structure. They are carrying massive ladles filled with dozens of tons of liquid, boiling steel right over the heads of the ground crew. The operator sitting in that tiny cabin high above is practically flying blind. He is fighting through the heat waves, the smoke and the glare, relying entirely on a specially trained rigger down on the floor to tell him exactly where to move, when to stop, and when to pour that liquid death. And how does that rigger communicate with the crane operator when radios fail and hands cannot be seen through the fog? Through a highly standardized system of sharp, piercing sounds that are scientifically proven to cut right through the low-frequency roar of the heavy machinery. Historically, and even today in many facilities, they use specialized sharp whistles. A specific sequence of high-pitched blasts means something very distinct and critical. One long, sharp blast might mean stop all movement immediately. Two short blasts might mean lower the massive load. Now, picture what happens if a new guy, completely unaware of this hidden language of survival, decides to stroll across the factory floor whistling a catchy tune. But the mechanics of this disaster are only the surface of the problem. What happens next when that casual sound reaches the crane cabin is something that seems completely absurd to outsiders, but it is a terrifying reality for those inside. The crane operator hears the whistle. In a split second, his trained reflexes kick in. He assumes the rigger down below is signaling him to release the payload because a critical moment has been reached. He pulls the heavy lever. In less time than it takes to blink, 80 tons of glowing liquid steel drop precisely where it was not supposed to go. The molten metal hits the concrete floor. Any trace of moisture on that floor instantly vaporizes, expanding violently and causing a massive steam explosion. The splash radius of 1600-degree metal turns the immediate area into a deadly rain of fire. And all of this happens simply because someone decided to whistle a happy tune while walking to the break room. This is not a theoretical scenario drawn up by some safety inspector in a comfortable office. This exact type of catastrophic miscommunication has happened. It is written in the blood of the workers who built this industry. When you understand the sheer destructive power hanging by a heavy cable above your head, you begin to realize why the veterans on the floor have zero tolerance for mistakes. But here is where the story takes a darker, more psychological turn. This technical safety rule did not just stay in the manual. Over decades of grueling shifts, sweat, and tragic accidents, the prohibition against whistling morphed into something much deeper. It became a taboo, a dark superstition. If you ask the oldest guys on the floor, the ones who have survived 30 years in the mills, they will tell you that whistling does not just confuse the crane operator. They believe whistling calls the devil to the factory floor. They say it invites death into the shift. Imagine working 12 hours a day in an environment that is constantly trying to kill you. You are dealing with toxic fumes, extreme heat, and crushing weights. The psychological toll of living under that constant threat changes a person. You start looking for patterns, for signs of bad luck, and the whistle became the ultimate bad omen. Knowing that a single human sound could instantly trigger an industrial catastrophe, would you have the nerve to walk onto that floor, knowing your life depends entirely on the absolute silence and discipline of everyone around you? Leave your opinion in the comments, because the way this culture enforces that silence is something you have to hear to believe. When you step onto the floor of a modern steel plant today, you might think things have changed. You look around and see digital displays, automated sensors, and workers carrying upgraded communication gear. You would assume that in the 21st century, we have solved the magnetic interference problem. And to some extent we have. Some facilities now use isolated, highly shielded radio systems or advanced laser-guided cranes that theoretically eliminate the need for the old whistle codes. But this is the detail that almost nobody talks about. Even in the most advanced multi-billion-dollar automated plants, the rule against whistling remains absolutely ruthless. Why? Because the culture of the factory floor does not trust technology as much as it trusts human survival instincts. An automated sensor can fail. A shielded radio can still experience a dead zone. The veterans know that technology provides a false sense of security, and the moment you relax in a steel mill is the moment you die. So, they enforce the old rules with an iron fist. If a new employee comes in, relying on his fancy new headset, and carelessly lets out a whistle, the older workers will shut him down immediately. Sometimes it is a harsh scream in the face. Sometimes, they wait until the shift is over, pull him into the locker room, and make sure he understands the gravity of his mistake in a way he will never forget. They do not care what the updated safety manual says. They care about going home to their families. And what comes next is the brutal reality of how this massive organism called the steel mill truly operates when the cameras are turned off. The truth is, a steel mill is an unforgiving organism. It does not care about your intentions, your mood, or your innocence. It only responds to physics and discipline. When you walk through those heavy doors, you are entering an environment where a single drop of sweat falling into the wrong vat of liquid metal can cause an explosion, and where a misplaced step can mean you never walk out again. The rule against whistling is a constant, invisible reminder of that extreme vulnerability. It forces every single person on that floor to remain hyper-aware of their surroundings and the deadly impact of their actions. This extreme environment strips away the casual habits of normal life. You learn to walk differently, to look differently, and most importantly, to listen differently. Every hiss of steam, every mechanical grind, and every sharp sound carries information that could save your life or end it in a flash. The whistle is a sound reserved exclusively for survival. To use it for anything else is an absolute insult to the danger everyone is facing together. It is a profound lesson in how extreme conditions create extreme cultures. What seems like a ridiculous, outdated superstition to an outsider looking in is actually a highly evolved defense mechanism, developed by the very people who built our modern world with their bare hands. So, the next time you look at a towering skyscraper, a massive bridge, or the heavy chassis of your car, think about the brutal environment where that steel was born. Think about the deafening roar of the electric arc furnaces, the blinding heat, and the heavy silence enforced by the men and women who work in the shadows of the cranes. They do not whistle while they work, because they know the ultimate cost of a single misunderstood note. If you ignore the harsh realities of these extreme jobs, you remain blind to the true cost of the infrastructure we take for granted every single day. The factory floor does not forgive, and the absolute silence it demands is the pure sound of survival.